The Mitsubishi A6M was the main Japanese fighter plane during World War II. The A6M was a long-range aircraft designed to be used on aircraft carriers. The plane was officially designated the Mitsubishi Navy Type 0 carrier fighter, or the Mitsubishi A6M Racon. The A6M was usually referred to by its pilots as the Racen, translating to Zero Fighter, as the fighter entered service into the Japanese Imperial Navy in the year 2600 in the imperial calendar used by the Japanese at the time. The Allies officially designated it as Zeke, though it was typically referred to as the Zero by Allied soldiers. The Zero was considered by many to be the greatest carrier-based aircraft of the time, with both high maneuverability and a long range. The Zero started its life as a highly effective dogfighter, being able to fight up to 12 Allied planes, something accomplished not only through the effective design of the Zero, but also because Japanese pilots were considered to be the best in the world at the outbreak of World War II. During the later phases of World War II, Japan began losing more and more pilots and lost their spot of most effective pilots, and the Zero became the main kamikaze plane, a fighting technique in which the pilot would intentionally fly into the deck of a boat to sink it. In early 1937, the Mitsubishi A5M entered service with the Imperial Japanese Navy, and just as soon, the Navy was looking for its replacement. On the 7th of October 1937, they issued the planning requirements for the prototype 12-Shi carrier-based fighter that outlined the requirements for their fighter. The requirements were sent to Nakajima Aircraft Company and to Mitsubishi, both of whom began the preliminary designs to be prepared for when more fleshed-out plans were to be sent to them. Based off of the experience of the A5Ms in China, the Navy came out with more requirements for the plane. They called for a speed of 270 knots at 13,000 feet, and for the plane to be able to reach 9,800 feet within 9.5 minutes. With drop tanks attached, small fuel tanks attached to the wings themselves, they wanted the plane to be able to fly for 2 hours at normal power and 6 to 8 hours while at cruising speed. The plane was to be armed with two 20mm cannons, two 7.7mm machine guns, and two 60-kilo bombs. A full radio set needed to be fitted in each aircraft with a radio direction finder for long-range navigation. The plane needed to be at least as maneuverable as the A5M, with a wingspan of only 12 meters to allow for it to be fitted on an aircraft carrier. The team at Nakajima declared that it would be impossible to meet the requirements of the Navy and subsequently pulled out of the competition. Mitsubishi's top designer, Jiro Horikoshi, believed that it would be possible to meet the requirements, but only if the plane was made to be as light as possible. The plane was designed using every weight-saving measure that was known of. The aircraft's primary building material was a secret type of metal being designed by Sumitomo Metal Industries, a metal called extra super duralumin, an extremely light but still strong metal, though it was prone to corrosion for weathering. To counter this, the metal was covered in an anti-corrosion coating. The plane was designed with very minimal to no armor around the cockpit, the engines, and other critical parts of the plane. The fuel tanks of the Zero were also lacking any form of self-sealing that was found on most other fighters. The idea behind doing this was based on the high skill of Japanese pilots, along with the maneuverability of the plane. What was the point of armor if you didn't get hit? The Zero was highly effective, though it would be taken down by small arms fire and was prone to catching on fire from enemy arms. The cockpit of the plane was also made far smaller than those of the Allies, though the Japanese were typically shorter, and so this didn't pose much of a problem to them. The first Zeros went into service with the 12th Rengo Kokutai in July of 1940. On the 13th of September, the Zeros had their first win during a mission to protect a G-3M bomber over Chongqing, China. While escorting the bomber, all 12 of the Zeros got into a dogfight with 34 Soviet-made I-15 and I-16 biplanes in the service of the Chinese Air Force. The Chinese claimed that 27 of their planes were shot down, while only 4 Zeros sustained damage during the almost half-an-hour-long dogfight. By next year, the Zeros had shot down at least 99 Chinese planes, though some sources claim up to 266. By the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was 521 Zeros in service of the Japanese Imperial Navy, 328 of which were in the first line. The Zero could travel much further than the Americans initially expected, something that allowed the Zeros to be able to attack Pearl Harbor. The Zeros very quickly created a very terrifying reputation amongst the Allies. This is due to the extreme maneuverability of the Zero compared to the other aircrafts of other Axis nations, such as Germany and Italy. The Zero also had extremely strong armaments, which could easily dispose of Allied planes in the Pacific theater. The Zero was even a match for the Supermarine Spitfire, the plane used by the British Air Force. Even though the Spitfire had a higher maximum speed than the Zero, it couldn't compare to the Zero's maneuverability, something aided by the extremely low stall speed of the Zero of less than 60 knots. One lieutenant said, "The RAF pilots were trained in methods that were excellent against German and Italian equipment, but suicide against the acrobatic Japs." The Allies soon managed to develop tactics on how to fight a Zero, however. Engaging a Zero in a dogfight would have been suicidal, so instead, Allied pilots were trained to fly high above the Zero, then dive bomb the Zero, firing a burst of rounds out of their machine guns or cannons before quickly regaining their altitude high above the Zero. The very light armoring of the Zeros meant that a single burst was usually enough to down the plane, as it would usually get lit on fire or blow up entirely. These tactics were used extensively by Grumman F-4F Wildcats during the defense of the Guadalcanal Island. In China, Burma, and India, these tactics were also used extensively by volunteer pilots against other Japanese planes with a similar maneuverability to the Zero. Another tactic used by Allied pilots was known as the Fach Weave, a maneuver that required 4 Allied planes for every 1 Zero. 2 groups of 2 planes would fly 60 meters apart. If a Zero followed one group of planes, the other group would follow the Zero and attack it from behind. Such a tactic was used extensively during the important Battle of Midway and many battles over the Solomon Islands. Japan began to lose more and more, losing both pilots and Zeros to the Allies. This would prove to be the greatest downfall in the Zero, as in 1942, the Americans managed to capture a Zero that was intact, allowing them to study it and find out its weaknesses. The primary weakness of the Zero was the same one that the Supermarine Spitfire had. The fuel system that the Zero used meant that it was unable to do negative G maneuvers, such as rolls, as the engine would be flooded with fuel and fail. This is something that the American pilots would be able to exploit in dogfights, allowing them to win against the Zeros. Another great weakness of the Zero was its aileron system. The aileron system, the thing that allows the Zero to move up and down, was designed with a manual aileron system in play, meaning that at high speeds, the Zero's aileron would struggle to move. This, combined with the decreasing skill of the Japanese pilots, meant that many of the Japanese would crash into the ocean accidentally, as the pilots were not trained enough to know that the Zero's ailerons got stuck at high speeds. This problem was lessened in earlier models that had servo tabs in place, which assisted them with moving the ailerons, but these were removed in later models as the servo tabs led to pilots overstressing the wings. The A6M Zero was a flawed design from the beginning. For quite some time though, the flaws of the plane did nothing to hurt it, and the plane was still a very well built and designed plane that combined some of the most modern technologies together, such as the wing design that reduced drag, and the metal that was used to construct it. The main hindrance of the A6M Zero was the bureaucracy that required the plane to be so light. The A6M was a plane that could have been revolutionary, but unfortunately it fell just short of reaching what was needed.